Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Untitled Town Council meeting for Tuesday, January 18th, 2022. I'm going to go ahead and ask our town clerk, Eddie, to call the roll, please.
Yes, Councilmember Knight.
Here.
Councilmember Dorn-Bicker.
Here, and I have the agenda.
Councilmember Muller.
Here.
Mayor Dunbar.
Here. Thank you. And we have previously confirmed that this teleconference meeting is complying with all governor's emergency executive order protocols, and all council members present have the agenda and can hear the proceedings. So with that, we'll move on to item 3 on the agenda. Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next, I'll entertain a motion to adopt today's agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Motion, Councilmember Muller, second, Councilmember Knight. Eddie, roll call, please.
Councilmember Muller.
Yes.
Councilmember Knight.
Yes.
Councilmember Dorn-Bicker.
Yes.
Mayor Dunbar.
Yes. We have no proclamations or recognitions, item 5, so we'll move to item 6. Do we have any public comment on non-agendized items, Eddie?
We do not, Mayor.
Thank you. We have no consent calendar. We're going to just move right ahead to our item 8A, a presentation about our housing element update. I believe we're going to start with Kirsty.
Hi, thank you. We do, Eddie, we have our consultants probably in the waiting room. I'm pleased to introduce Placeworks. They're a local consulting firm who specialize in housing elements. And Jennifer Gastielum, who's the project manager, actually was the one who did our previous cycle housing element. So we've been working with Placeworks since about December, and we've had a few internal meetings, and this is the first of many public meetings, and we're kicking off the housing element update. And I'm pleased to introduce Nicole West with Placeworks, Jennifer Gastielum, and Cynthia Walsh. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to them, and I'll finish at the end.
Great, thanks, Kirsty. Yes, as she mentioned, Jennifer Gastielum, I've actually authored your last 2 housing elements. So I've been working for the town for quite a long time, back since I think 2005 was our first time around. So it's great to be back, and a few familiar faces and some new ones. So that's also exciting. We have a presentation for you today to give you some updates on some new state laws. And I believe Cynthia will start the presentation, and then Nicole will tag team it with her, and then we'll all be available for questions. So with that, go right ahead.
Great, thank you, Cynthia Walsh. Okay, so we're just gonna jump right into the presentation. Next slide. Okay, so today we're going to do an overview of the housing element. We're going to talk a little bit about the regional housing needs allocation. We're going to go over some of the new laws that affect the housing element update, and we're going to talk about our project schedule moving forward. Next slide. One more, sorry. Okay, so just to give a quick short overview of the housing element is a required element of the general plan, and it is unique in that it must be reviewed and certified by the State Housing and Community Development Department. We also refer to them as HCD. The housing element must include a plan to accommodate the town's regional housing needs allocation. We also refer to that as RHNA, and we'll get into that a little bit more in a few slides. So the housing element update for the 6th cycle covers the time frame from January 31st, 2023 to January 31st, 2031. So it is an 8-year time frame. And the previous cycle, the current housing element, is from 2015 to 2023. So the 6th will obviously replace the 5th. The due date or the adoption deadline for the housing element is January 31st, 2023. So we have about a year, almost to the date, to get the housing element in for certification. The housing element is composed of several different sections. The housing needs assessment looks at existing and projected housing needs, as well as market trends. We also look at special needs groups, which include seniors, large households, persons with disabilities, the homeless population. And then we also evaluate any potential constraints. So there's an entire section that looks at different things such as processing times and fees, infrastructure, and also environmental constraints. We will also be including an assessment of fair housing. This is a new requirement with this 6th cycle update, and this section will look at fair housing issues, and then we will identify strategies to address any barriers identified. We will also complete an inventory of available sites that are available for the development of housing. And then we will complete an evaluation of the 5th cycle programs. And this is kind of a checks and balances we go through and we see what was accomplished, what needs to be continued into the 6th cycle. And then once we have completed all of those sections, we update the town's goals, policies, and programs to not only comply with state law, but also to reflect the town's plan for accommodating the community's needs for the next 8 years. Next slide. So public participation is a very important component of the housing element update process. There will be several opportunities for public participation. There will be community workshops, focus group meetings, steering committee meetings, and we will plan for presentations to both the ZDRB and the town council. So you will see us multiple times throughout this next year. Next slide. So the regional housing needs allocation, or the RHNA. So the RHNA is really the driving factor of the housing element. The state hands down an allocation to ABAG, Association of Bay Area Governments, which for the 6th cycle, that was about 500,000 units. ABAG then allocates the RHNA to each subregion, region, and or jurisdiction within the region. For Yountville, you were allocated a total of 72 units to plan for over the next 8-year cycle. When comparing that to the 5th cycle, that is definitely almost, more than quadrupled since the 17 units going from 17 to 72. Next slide. So the regional housing needs allocation is a state required process, and this process helps to ensure that all towns, cities, and counties are planning for enough housing to address the needs of all segments of the community. And this is done by providing sites at varying densities that will allow for different types of housing. And I should note that the town is not required to build these units, but the town must provide the land at the zoning at varying densities and incentives to help facilitate the development of those units. Next slide. So looking a little closer at the RHNA is broken out into 4 different categories. So we're looking at the top row is going to show you the very low income, moderate income, and above moderate income. And then on the far right-hand side, that shows you the total allocation for each jurisdiction in Napa County. And now I'm going to pass this over to Nicole, and she'll go into the income information a little bit more.
Thank you, Cynthia. I'm Nicole West with PlaceWorks, and thank you for having us today. So here we see on the slide what we mean when we say lower income. And this is based off of the Napa County incomes. And so the median for a family for a 4 in Napa County is 109,200. And so based on that, we look at percents of that income, and that informs the categories of extremely low, very low, and low. And then we have here on the slide some typical occupations that are earning these kinds of incomes. And you can see part-time employees, Social Security income recipients can often earn extremely low incomes. And then very low incomes are typical for personal care aides, veterinary assistants, wine salespersons, just for examples. And then in the low category, graphic designers, school social workers, mail carriers, fine dining servers. So again, we're talking about accommodating the workforce really, and making sure that everybody has housing that they can afford. So density is one of the most important factors that affects the feasibility of housing that's affordable to households with lower incomes. Higher density housing reduces the land cost for each housing unit. So that reduces the total development cost. And based on that assumption, the California statute sets what are called default densities. And those are the densities that are presumed to be suitable for lower income housing. So when we talk in the housing element about meeting the lower income RHNA, that doesn't necessarily mean that all of those units have to be deed restricted affordable units, but they do have to be accommodated on land where a sufficient density is allowed. And so for Yountville, that's 20 units per acre as a suburban jurisdiction. All right, there's a lot going on this slide. So the housing element has to demonstrate that the town has adequate sites with capacity, like we're talking about here, to meet all these RHNA numbers. And you can see in the middle there, the allocation for each of these income categories and the range of what is considered very low and moderate and above moderate. And so as we start on our journey of assisting you with meeting these requirements, we look first at the code to see what zoning is already established and what densities are allowed. And then we'll be working with staff over the coming months to identify a list of sites that are most likely to be developed with housing and look at how many units could be accommodated on each of those sites and make sure that there's capacity to meet that total 72 at each income level. And then it's also important to note that accessory dwelling units and proposed projects can be counted towards the RHNA as well. So we'll use a combination of different approaches to get there. And then looking back at what was built in the fifth cycle, these are the building permits that were issued. You can see all the way to the right, the goal that was set for the town's allocation. And the fifth cycle is actually not done yet. There's still 2021 and all the way up till 2023 to get a few more units in there potentially. And although the very low and low income units in the fifth cycle did not hit those targets, it is important to note that the town has a history of meeting and exceeding those targets. The fourth cycle, which had a higher target than the fifth cycle, the fifth cycle was developed as we were at the tail end of the recession. And so there's lower allocations kind of across the state as compared with the preceding cycle and the one we're going into. So in the fourth cycle, there were 54 new affordable housing units, which exceeded the total of 47. All right, so now we will switch gears a little bit and talk about some of the new laws that are in effect this cycle that are impacting what we're doing. And one of the most important ones is AB 215 as related to the timeline for housing elements. And they just sprung this on us last October. So we're still adjusting, and all of the jurisdictions in the ABAG region and are adjusting to these new mandatory requirements. So we'll need to have the document posted for public review for at least 30 days prior to submitting to HCD for their initial review. And then if there's comments that are received, we'll extend that a little bit as well. So we need to account for all that timing. And then the HCD's review periods were tweaked a little bit by this law. And so we just need to be aware that once the draft is submitted to HCD, they will have now up to 90 days to do their initial review. And then at the end of those 90 days, we either get a letter with findings or a certificate of conditional compliance. And so potentially we'll need to make some revisions at that point, and hopefully we'll get to work with our HCD reviewer to talk through what they're looking for and then come back to you with some revisions and then move forward with an adopted housing element that needs to be, and I'll talk in more detail when we get to the schedule too about this, but the adopted housing element, now the review period is 60 days for that certification review. And it is potentially, there might be another need for additional review in there. It's been a tough cycle for everybody. All right, but so they added these statutory requirements for more time, but they didn't give us any more time. Our deadline is still January 31st, 2023 So we're working under those constraints. And then some other new laws that are important, AB 1397, non-vacant sites. So if we're getting into this with staff, we'll figure out what we're working with and we'll see if these apply in Yountville. But HCD is looking a little more closely at non-vacant sites now to make sure that redevelopment actually is likely. And then they are also wanting a little bit more evidence when it comes to small sites and large sites to ensure that these are realistically developable as well. And then SB 166, the no net loss zoning. So we just need to make sure actually that we're giving you enough flexibility and giving you enough sites on your list so that if you get projects coming forward, you're able to approve projects and make sure that you still have sufficient sites to meet your lower income RHNA. All right, another very important new law is AB 686, Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing. So all housing elements now have to assess fair housing issues and look very closely at some areas of opportunity and access to resources. And this is data that we get from the state where they've compiled it across the whole state, looking at a variety of factors like clean air and water, access to jobs, and shopping, things like that. And we want to make sure that all the new housing that's going in also has access to these resources as well. So we need to identify housing sites that will foster an inclusive community and provide this equitable access, and identify strategies to address any of the identified barriers that come up when we do this analysis. And then there will be a robust program to address any of these issues that come up. All right, moving on to the project schedule. So here we are kicking off the project and having our first town council meeting. We're going to be assisting the town with some ad hoc 2x2 steering committee meetings. And then we have a couple of community workshops coming up. One is going to be virtual and then another one will be in person. We have a target to produce the administrative draft of the housing element in April, and we'll get staff review of that, have a couple more steering committee meetings, and then release the public review draft. We'll come back at our next, well, actually I skipped over town council meeting number 2 in March, and then town council meeting number 3 in May or June. And we have our target to submit the housing element to HCD in July or September of this year. And again, we have that 90-day statutory period that begins. We hope we can get a conference call with our reviewer. That's what we always strive for. It all depends on how many elements get submitted to them all at the same time. They get very busy and bogged down. And it's possible that we'll need to have a second draft, an additional 60-day review, depending on how that first review goes. We'll come back again before you periodically, and then we have the submission and approval and certification, hopefully all buttoned up on schedule, on time. And so now I want to open it up for questions about this presentation, and Jennifer Gastelum will field questions for our team, and Kirsty can chime in if there's anything that we need you for. Thank you.
And thank you for the presentation. I know Kirsty's going to wrap up after we have some questions. One question I'm going to start with is, do you anticipate an impact, especially to the schedule and timing, based on lawsuits from jurisdictions across the state that are challenging their allocation numbers? Do you see that being something that might totally throw off the schedule you just presented, or is that going to be fairly solid regardless of legal actions?
We will go on the statutory deadlines, which depend, no matter what happens with RHNA or anything like that, those will not change. So we saw a similar process down in the Southern California region as well, with appeals and all those things. And we still had to stay the course and meet the deadlines. So.
Okay, yeah. The other question that I wanted to follow up, you mentioned ADUs to be calculated into this with the other state laws that are allowing parcel divisions and multiple housing units on those split parcels? That's actually a good thing, sounds like, for the ability to reach these numbers as long as they fall in the right categories. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you're referring to SB 9. We are in the trenches trying to figure that out. We will use it to the ability of the town to count if possible, if you want to, if you don't want to. What the state is looking for at this point, without a ton of guidance on it, they do want to see that there is property owner interest and that there is a track record of potentially subdividing lots if possible. So it's an uphill battle, such as using ADUs as well, because we have to project those, and that's not guaranteed because they're actually not built at this point. So we're working through that, and with your comfort level, we will proceed with trying to identify those, and most likely any SB 9 units that we would use would likely be for above moderate market rate housing to count towards the RHNA. So.
And I just thought of something else related to ADUs, because the state has basically taken away the authority from local government and mandates their approvals with very limited restrictions. Does that have an impact on zoning locally? There is no ADU zoning, basically, because it's in any residential neighborhood. So could one argue all residential properties are potential sites for ADUs, and therefore you can more easily show the developableness of units?
I wish that was the case. It would make our job a lot easier. Again, there is a calculation. Cynthia, would you like to take this one in terms of how many ADUs we can count? While yes, you can technically do them everywhere, HCD doesn't go for that. So
yeah, that would be way too easy in HCD's book. So we do have to look at past trends. So we look at what the town has been producing in the way of ADUs. And obviously with the regulations being relaxed, there's going to be more and more moving forward, I assume. Obviously in the past, things were more restrictive. So what we have to do is we have to look at, typically HCD likes us to go back to 2018 to 2021, and we come up with an annual average, and then we can project that annual average over the next 8 years. And then ABAG, excuse me, performed they did a affordability study. So then we look at that affordability study to kind of distribute the units between the different income groups. But we do have to look at past trends right now.
In that regards, also, one of the things that staff is looking at and recommending will be a ADU affordable policy. In other words, we will buy down or provide grants to offset the construction for units that are set aside for, say, 10 years as an affordable. So that'll be a new policy that you'll see. And the good news for us is that that can be funded through our Measure S. So that'll be one of the new things that will come out of our housing element, but it's also been something that's been in the works. The council's expressed an interest. To date, most of our ADUs have gone in the market rate housing, and we haven't seen a distribution, and we have seen very few actually go on to the rental market.
Yeah, last question before I go to the council. What is the status of the ability to kind of trade units with adjacent jurisdictions? For us, that would mean the county of Napa. Is it permitted? I seem to remember that was a possibility, but then it may have been prohibited. Could you just explain, if we were to be able to build more than we need, could we in fact have a relationship with the county?
Two different, I think that's kind of goes across a couple different things. So there is the allocations that you are assigned. And if you wanted to trade units in terms of giving, or taking allocation from the county or giving allocation or whatever the case may be, I think that process has passed. You would have had to develop a consortium to do that analysis. In terms of getting credit for, or you taking credit or them taking credit in terms of built units, there might be something to do with the memorandum of understanding. I think that would have to be an ABAG related question with probably some attorney involvement to get to the bottom of that.
Shocking. ABAG and attorneys. Okay, Councilmember Mueller.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. One of them was on one of your very early slides. You said that 41% of Yountville was considered low income. Can you, what's the derivation or the source of that data that comes up with 41%? Is that income or based on the job list you had next to it?
It is based on income. I would have to go back to verify, but I'm pretty sure that it is ACS data, which is American Community Survey census data.
And my second part of that question, did you include the veterans home residents in that data, or is that for Yountville excluding the veterans home?
That's a great question that would have to be taken up with.
I think right now it is included in all of Yountville, which the veterans home is included in the Yountville boundaries. So we'll dig into the census data or the census block groups so we can show you a map for our next check-in. But as my understanding, and Kirsty is that, and Steve, yours the same.
I believe the information that Nicole's referencing is from the survey, and the census survey did include the entirety of the town of Yountville,
Yes.
which explains why the percentage was so high.
Okay, and my next question, staying on the same topic regarding the veterans, we do not have zoning authority up there. So can you speak to our housing element related to the state property, the Yountville Veterans Home?
Kirsty, do you want to kick this one off?
Sorry, I've been.
Yeah.
No, it's a good question.
It's a really good question, and I think we have stumped HCD. So we have encouraged conversation early on. PlaceWorks initiated a phone call with a representative of HCD to ask this specific question: if the housing element would consider some level of conversation or agreement or understanding if we could rely on some of the workforce housing on the property, since the population of the veterans home is being included in our RENA number. As to date, have PlaceWorks heard back? I know we're due an answer, but I think
we have not. We've reached out to HCD to see how a development agreement would play out for that property to meet a portion of the town's arena, but we have not received an answer from them yet.
But it is something we're definitely considering.
We're actively trying to find a way.
Yes. And we're trying to find out sooner than later.
Yes.
So it'll influence the update.
Great. And my last question, I actually heard and read from Gavin Newsom's budget update and his discussion specifically on housing, that he will be identifying excess state land. Do we know anything about excess state land as it relates to Yountville? Or has he identified where these excess state lands exist?
I'm going to try to answer that one for you.
Great.
Yeah, he had an executive order back in January 2019 that identified prioritized state property that would be determined to be surplus to be a priority for housing development. And I've been in pretty regular communication with General Services and also HCD about that. They put together something like 44,000 state parcels, whittled it down to 150 over many months that are actually viable, developable sites. The Veterans Home is on that list, as is the state hospital, the Napa State Hospital. And so while we don't control the zoning or the development of the campus, I have been actively involved in communicating our interest in having housing there. And my understanding is that it would be counted toward our RENA allocation, though we don't control it the same way we would if it was in the town proper.
All right, thank you. Those are all my questions. Thank you to everybody.
But we'll still need to confirm that with HCD because that was 2 years ago. Councilmember Knight.
Thank you, Mayor. It seems like we're all on the same page with some of these questions. So thank you, Ms. West, for your the presentation, and I would love to have a copy of it if you could and send it. And I'm sure Director Shelton will probably be including it on the record, probably on our website through the whole process of the housing element. But it's a good first look at everything. So thank you for that. And so just another quick question, I guess, follows up with the mayor's comment about and the questions about the veterans home. I would assume their income level, I know in census data they're considered a group quarters. And so it seems to me our income, lower income levels are probably affected by the fact of the population of the veterans home and it considered group housing. But my main concern is how do we engage. I do remember the governor back in 2019 looking for lands that could be used for affordable housing, and my question is I guess how do we engage that conversation and maybe try to help move that process along. I know a lot of members up at the home recognize the fact that even with the building of this new skilled nursing facility that there's a significant need for staff on that property, it would seem like it would be beneficial to help that process move along. So there could be maybe workforce housing at the veterans home for nurses and other attendants to serve that population.
Well, I'll answer that one, Steve. I've been working on that for about 8 years and working directly with, again, General Services and Housing and Community Development, as well as CalVet and our state and congressional legislators. We are continuing to have the conversations that have been for a very long time. I brought it up many, many times over the years, and we're hopeful that we're seeing legitimate progress that could happen. You know, I've said this every year for about 8 years, but again, it looks like, especially because the skilled nursing facility is finally on the verge of breaking ground, it has been approved and has a financial budget approved. That was the precursor to housing. And so the hope is that parallel to the construction of the skilled nursing facility will be progress made on housing that could potentially be prioritized for caregivers on the property as well as military veterans.
Just to expand on that a little bit, I will also share that at both the elected and the staff level, the veterans home master plan also identifies the need for additional staff housing, especially as it relates to the SNF. So there are a number of policy documents, ongoing conversations at both the elected official level. We've also been, as the mayor alluded, heavily involved with our state senator and assembly members supporting housing across several levels. So I would imagine that effort will continue until sometime, because it's logical. There is a level of employee housing on the property historically, and certainly when you look at the policy statements, it's on the list for potential use. There's a need for additional employees for the SNF. It makes sense that the property is developed for workforce housing.
And just understand that kind of process, especially when it's in state government, is not advertised publicly during the process. There have been many, many conversations that happen. They just don't happen in a public forum all the time. So people should not assume that there's been no action. It just has not been something that can be made public because they're part of pretty complicated negotiations with a lot of state agencies.
Yeah, and to that point, it's also, we will have to go up to HCD and walk down the hallway to connect people that have been working with us, because one arm of HCD is focused on this, and there's another arm we've been having conversations with, and they don't necessarily know that. So, I mean, when Kirsty and the team talked about that, what we're really trying to get in place right now is an understanding that the Veterans Home is a logical site for housing. Active, meaningful, purposeful conversations are going on. But in the classic HCD response, it's not under the town zoning jurisdiction, which is why ultimately we had to give back our SB2 grant, because we couldn't guarantee an outcome that would match a HCD objective. So I'm just going to say we're going to have to figure out how to footnote all of this, but I do think it's certainly footnotable and explainable. And we've all been engaging with our local legislators, and I anticipate that we may need to continue that effort going forward to make sure that either we get an acknowledgement in our report to HCD, and then who knows, this is the type of stuff that it may finally break through, just like we have several of our projects that could break through.
Mayor, just to follow up, and I want to just say I appreciate all the work that you've done over the many years on communicating with Cal Vet and the state on the Veterans Home. And so my question is really, we're back to a new housing element, and just hoping we find a way to break some ground and move that conversation forward. But I do appreciate all the work that you've done on behalf of the town and the veterans there. So thank you.
Cautious optimism continues.
Well, I share the same optimism, and I'm really looking forward to, seeing if we can somehow formalize this. And I know PlaceWorks have already done what they can and already facilitated the conversation with HCD. So we've started from the beginning, having these conversations, and I hope that all the work that everyone's done up until now really can come to some level of fruition, because it feels like it's the right thing.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands raised. Yes, Councilor Dornbecker, I saw that you put your hand down, so I didn't know. Okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry. A lot of this has answered most of my questions. I just have two questions. And one is, if worker housing does get built on the property at the Veterans Home, has HCD said they would recognize that as part of our RENA allocation? Do we know the answer to that?
That's the question PlaceWorks and myself, we already had a conversation with HCD to ask that, and we're just pending the response. We are hoping that we get some level of response, at least some receptivity, before we start rolling up our sleeves and talking when and where. So we were hoping to have an update by today, but we don't.
Years ago, the answer was yes, we could count them because they are within the town limits, but there are different people making those decisions at the state level now. And so we need to make sure that that's still the answer, hopefully. Yeah.
And my second question, yeah. I have one more question and then I'm done. And my second question is finding developers who are willing to develop low income properties is very difficult. Does HCD have any help for the jurisdictions in finding developers, or in introducing them, or offering some sort of seminars and things for developers to get them interested? Do you know?
I can speak to that. I do know that through some of the REAP allocation, the new funding, that ABAG was given and the state was given, that potentially developer type clearinghouses and developer forums is definitely, I believe, the Napa Sonoma region is also probably going to be doing a developer forum, so to kind of market your region. So I believe there is stuff in the works that will help promote that.
That's great. Thank you very much. And thank you for all of you've done, Mayor Dunbar. And thank you for what you're going to have to be doing for the update. I appreciate it.
Well, and just to follow up on your question and Jennifer's answer, a couple of years ago, when we were on the verge of successfully putting out RFQ, or either request for qualifications or proposals, General Services had reached out to some developers to invite them to the campus. Then some issues came up in Calvet, and that never happened. So they already do have a process in place based on that 2019 governor's executive order. They've put together criteria and a process for pre-approving developers for state projects that are related to the surplus properties orders. And in large part, when they are offering the land at no cost, that is a huge incentive for the developers. The question that we still have is developers in some cases want to build for sale housing, not for rent housing, for the return on their investment in that development project. It's unlikely the state property, at least at the Vets home, would be for sale, because the state's not giving the land away, but they are allowing it to be developed at no cost as long as it is done for affordable housing. So that's maybe oversimplifying it, but that's my understanding of how they're incentivizing and already attracting developers to these kinds of projects. Because yes, often developers don't want to build at affordable housing levels because of the return on investment is difficult.
Thank you.
Councilmember Knight.
Thank you, Mayor. Last quick question. Probably for over 25 years, we've had the Catholic Church property as a listed potential site for housing. I know we've talked about this over maybe last year and a half as you were moving towards this housing element. How soon, how early, or how late in this process, and I think you talked about this a bit on your report, will we find out whether properties that have been designated in the past are still eligible to be counted towards our arena numbers?
I think at this point, we're trying to focus today's conversation just kind of big picture and what is a housing element. We're going to get down to the nitty gritty on the site specifics. We are planning on continuing to rely on that property, and at this point, we don't see a reason why we can't. We might have to provide some level of incentives to make it shovel ready. But at this point, I would like to reserve the site conversation to a time when it's adequately publicly noticed and everyone knows what we're talking about.
Thank you.
I don't see any other hands. Any public comment come in, Eddie?
No, Mayor, no public comment.
Thank you. Kirsty, did you want to wrap up still, or have you covered what you wanted to?
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to share with the council, and if Placeworks can stay on until afterwards, that would be great. And just kind of like Nicole mentioned, public process is going to be a really important element, and it's going to be happening, in the next couple months. And over the next 3 months, we expect to have many public meetings. I just wanted to remind everybody that my door is open. If you know of anyone who would like to be involved in a stakeholder meeting, if you want to invite anybody, please share my information. I'm going to walk you through in just a minute. I also wanted to cast the net again and share that, Yountville is one of 16 local jurisdictions that ABAG has specially funded with this program called the Napa Sonoma Housing Collaborative. And Yountville has been very active in it and participated. And they provided a grant for a public outreach called Let's Talk Housing. And Yountville is going to be the first website. And I wanted to walk you through it. We hope to launch it by the end of the week. And just bear with me while I share my screen. So, can everybody see my screen? Okay, can everybody share my screen? See my screen?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to share with you a video that's a lot of fun, and I have to share my sound. So I'm going to redo that after I walk you through where to find all the information. So everybody knows the Town of Yountville website. I just want to remind everybody we have our own little button here the housing element update. We are going to be continually updating this exact page. And I just wanted to let everybody know, if you want to know when the next meeting is, this is currently by tomorrow, this is going to look a little bit different. Once we start having maps with sites and numbers, we're going to be uploading it to this website. And then in addition, we have launched, this website will be public by the end of the week, maybe even by tomorrow. It's still in a little bit of a draft phase. But this Let's Talk Housing website is part of that grant that ABAG provided for this Napa Sonoma Collaborative. And I just wanted to walk you through, it very much walks anybody from the public why we have to do it, what's the timeline. A reminder to download the town app. We'll also be including updates to that. A reminder to update check out our website. A little bit of our allocation and how we did in the last housing element cycle and what we're expected in the future. Another calendar just to remind, and most importantly, don't look at this map yet, but most importantly here, if you know anybody who just wants to be on the mailing list to make sure that they're given updates, please have them fill out this document. You don't have to fill out your address, but your email is important. And if there's any comments or suggestions, feel free to add it here. So again, this is a specific website. There's a lot more information, why this matters, how this works. This is a generic platform. We're the only unique on the first page. And again, this is paid for by the grant from the ABAG, and Yountville is participating in it. And I just wanted to share with everybody a little sneak peek of what to expect. And now I'm going to share a video. So hold on one second. And both of these are going to be available in English and Spanish. And when you see the link, there's two options. So hopefully I pick it in English, but if you need it to be in Spanish, people can also access it. So let me just reshare.
It's time for Yountville's housing element to be updated. Why should this matter to you? First, it's important to understand what a housing element is. The housing element is part of your town's general plan, developed to address local housing challenges and to find solutions to the housing needs of your community. With your input, these housing needs will be addressed through goals, policies, and programs. Your town's housing element must be updated every 8 years and must be certified by the California Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD. HCD requires your town to identify suitable housing sites for a diverse range of income levels and a variety of housing types. This can include vacant land, existing buildings that can be redeveloped, and single-family houses that have the potential to build accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. Based on demographic data and projected needs, your town must identify enough of these sites to plan for a target number of homes. This is also known as a Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or RHNA. For this update, Yountville has been given a RHNA allocation of 72 housing units, including 30 for low-income residents. Now that you understand what the housing element is, let's return to the original question. Why should this matter to you? In Yountville, any individual making under $63,050 is considered low income. Ensuring there is housing available for low-income residents means ensuring housing is available for vital members of your community, including young adults, older adults on fixed income, and younger families. For example, will your adult children be able to afford to stay in the town they grew up in? Will you be able to raise your family in an affordable home? Will your retiring parents have a safe and comfortable place to live? Addressing housing affordability, access, and equity will all be priorities for assessing your town's housing needs. The Housing Element Update will plan for strategies to ensure all members of the community can have access to a healthy, safe place to live. Furthermore, by law, your updated housing element must address all the requirements to be certified by HCD. And if your plan is not certified, then Yountville's decision-making authority can be taken away, and the state can take control over where housing will be built. It's important that the housing element complies with these requirements in order to maintain local control, so that housing policy reflects what the community decides is the best approach for providing enough housing. Your perspective and insight are vital to ensuring that the updated element reflects your housing needs and priorities, which are a key part of creating a plan that upholds your community values. Your community should be an ideal place to live now and for future generations, and the update to the housing element is an opportunity to have these community conversations. How can you get involved? Take a look at the information provided on this slide for more details, and thank you for your participation in these important discussions.
And that is our special sneak peek, so you guys know where to reach it. If you have any questions, go to the website, reach out to me, encourage people to get involved, and we look forward to kicking off the big conversation pieces with PlaceWorks at our next public meeting of February 15th.
Thank you, Kirsty. I do have one last question, whether it's for PlaceWorks or Kirsty. In the video, it references a loss of local control about housing. Isn't there financial implications for a non-compliant housing element as well in terms of state funding access?
Yes, that is true. If you were to be, you could be sued. There's an example of the city of Folsom as well as the city of Pleasanton, both who did not do their housing elements, who were sued, I believe by Habitat for Humanity. In the case of Pleasanton, they lost development rights. They had to go to the county to get permits, and they actually ended up having to pay, I think, $3 million for the lawsuit that they lost because they didn't do it. And in addition, they had to implement an inclusionary housing program that required all developments to include affordable housing. So, I mean, some of those are worst case scenarios. But yes, there's a number of penalties in the state. The legislation is always coming up with new ones that at this point have not been implemented, but there is a number of them that get brought forward each year that include penalties like transportation funds and such if you do not have a certified housing element. So
yeah, and I seem to remember the governor was at Huntington Beach that the state sued. So there are significant motivations to comply with the housing element.
Yes.
But great, thank you for that preview, Kirsty. And it's very simple to understand, a very complicated topic. So thank you for that. And all of our folks with PlaceWorks, we'll be seeing a lot of you this year.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, we're going to move on now. We have a public hearing, municipal code update, introduction and waiving of the reading of ordinance number 22-505, amending chapters 13.08, 13.20, and 13.24 of Title 13 of the Yountville Municipal Code related to the water system, water conservation, and water shortage emergencies. So we'll start with a staff report and then we'll open the hearing and proceed. So, John?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Town Council. I'm John Ferns, your Director of Public Works, and I'm going to give a brief presentation about this. I will spare you a PowerPoint and just keep this one with words. As you might imagine, during the ongoing drought, we've spent a lot of time in our Title 13 water in the Yountville Municipal Code, the water ordinance. And in doing so, we've determined that an administrative update would be timely in order to make the language in the ordinance more user-friendly for both our water customers and us as staff enforcing that code. So in doing so, we've prepared the draft that's before you for consideration. In this version, we attempt to clean up the three sections that we referred to in the title, the general provisions, the water conservation section, and the water shortage emergency section. In general terms, our efforts add language making a violation of the water rules an administrative or enforcement item, which ties it to chapter 8.05 of the municipal code. It also adds a limit to both the residential and commercial water customers, an annual limit to their use. It does add a time limit to, or it imposes a time limit to repair a leak. It allows for the installation of a flow restricting device on what I'll say is bad water customers. And it repeals sections regarding civil penalties rather it ties them to administrative fines. And I want to provide one quick clarification. There was a blank in section 13.2020 prohibitions and limitations of the proposed ordinance, referring to the commercial and industrial water customer annual limit. So in looking at that, we realized that there's no one size fits all for the size and shape of the water customers that we have here in Yountville. And so it's not as easy to put just a number as a cap on it like we did the residential numbers. So rather than put a number there today, we're proposing a language revision that would say commercial or industrial customers shall use no more water per year than an amount established by resolution of the town council. And so that gives us the ability to bring forward a formulaic calculation, which would be much more appropriate for the size and scale of water customers that we have in our commercial water base. So that language is proposed to be included in today's revision. And then we would bring forward a staff report and a resolution establishing what that number is. So that's kind of the brief summary. I'm available for questions. Gary's available for questions. And we'll try to bring this forward as fast as we can.
Thank you. Do we have violators that that make this a very timely issue in terms of changing the language so that there are clear consequences? Is that part of the motivation here, John?
Yes, in implementing the ordinance, in administering the drought with the ordinance that we have had some challenges with the current language, and this would make our enforcement efforts much quicker and easier to manage going forward. We've done a lot of outreach, we've done a lot of communication, and we have some customers in our customer base that need the extra attention or the extra motivation to become compliant. And this would give us that by allowing us to implement the administrative enforcement section of it.
So you're basically streamlining the process for bad, what do you call it, bad actors?
Yes.
Okay.
And also, you may have heard about some of the challenges, St. Helena, and some of the fine structures and the basis. We're simplifying this, so really we focus on the excessive water use in the notification, and then people would be fined in accordance with our municipal fine structure. So $100, $500, which makes it less burdensome for staff than trying to calculate a daily diet, if you will, or water restriction limitation. And we think it would be more effective to focus on those folks that are truly, as we say, excess water. They're not following, they're not turning their sprinklers off, they're not doing those things, rather than trying to go off and track every account and determine if they were over their average or what. So it's a simpler focus that we think can be more productive long term.
Thank you. Questions of the staff report before I open the public hearing? Councilmember Dornbecker.
Yes, I'd like to find out if other municipalities have used I have it right here. The restrictive, putting restrictions on the flow of a homeowner's water or things. That's something that is a thing, Gary? Do you mind if I ask?
Yes, there are other jurisdictions that use this, and in water system ordinances, it is one enforcement tool. The circumstances that it's used under, what triggers that changes from code to code. Some jurisdictions don't have it, but many do.
Thank you. And then my next question is, I saw in the report that hauled water would be okay under, but I'd like to know under what circumstances would water be hauled by a truck and dropped off to either a home or a business?
Generally, that is for the draining and refilling of swimming pools and or emergency situations when town potable water would not be available.
I see, but swimming pools can only be done to a swimming pool under certain circumstances, right? Not just at the beginning or the end of a season.
Right now, the goal is to have swimming pools filled with non-town potable water. That means trucked in from an external source, and town staff needs to be there to watch it happen, so we can assure that they're not using potable water to fill their swimming pool. And we apply that as a condition of approval for any project that comes through with a pool that is included in it.
And my third question is residential allotment can not exceed 250 gallons, give or take, per year. Does that take into consideration the number of people in the household? So
the residential allotment is based on 450 gallons per meter per day. And the 450 gallons assumes 3 people living in the house using 150 gallons per person per day, which is tied to our phase 2 water shortage emergency regulations that we are currently in and are remaining in the code.
Okay, and it's after 2 weeks, 15 days, the town could install a flow restrictor. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Thank you. That's all my questions for now.
If I could, council members, based on one of the areas that we have had the bigger issue is with our out-of-town water customers, where we have seen occasional customers use 16 to 20,000 gallons of water in a month in violation of their irrigation. So what this would allow us to do is put the restrictive meter so that if they reach their annual allotment, they're not able to use it more. So that's really a different target audience for us, but that's one of the areas where we have had some customers in the unincorporated area use well in excess of 200,000, and including one month over 100,000 in that month alone, which clearly meant that they were irrigating the vineyard and filling their retention pond.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misspoke. It was 16,250 gallons per year of the allotment per year. Sorry.
Councilmember Knight.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Director Ferns. And then thank you for answering some of my questions beforehand. I just want to go over just a few of them. And maybe the most relevant one I want to come to now was in the report under limitations, you cited that the town would notify people and they would have 48 hours to correct a leak, malfunction. And I was just wondering, in terms of you answered, you said that's the standard in the industry, but what would concern me about something is I would hope that in an ordinance we create something that maybe would be that people could respond to. And so in theory, the ordinance says if you have a leak and the town reports to you that you have that there's a leak, that you have to take care of it within 48 hours, which means on a Thursday or having to do it by Saturday or a Friday by Sunday. Is there a way we could maybe tighten up that language to say like 2 business days or something, so we know that it's an effective time for someone to find out and respond to it? It just, that seems to me would be improvement of the language.
The leak compliance has been challenging for us during this time of drought, and that's the goal of adding it to this section. The 48 hours notification, depending on the size or scale of the leak, we would certainly want a response in a timely manner. The 48 hours is discretionary. We could change it as part of this discussion if town council feels like it should be more generous in time. But in general, in other jurisdictions, they use that same time frame, and a leak is defined as water wasting, and we want to remedy it as quick as possible.
I'd also like to point out the language says also 48 hours of notification by the town unless other arrangements are made with the town. And that language, I think, Councilmember Knight, may go to your point where what we're really trying to do is if the person with the leak is working with us, acknowledges it and says, hey, I'm bringing out a leak detection service and they can't get here, then we can take all of that into consideration. What we've also found, frankly, is some people just ignore us completely. And I think I really do want to stress that other language there, so that if somebody is working with our staff and says, hey, I can get the crew out there, but it's this, then the language is in there so that they can do that. This is really meant when we have somebody that just does not respond to the town's effort to reach out. And I will point out that we call and we email both based off the information that we now have in our customer database.
And just as follow up, Mayor, I perfectly understand if there was a major leak or a problem that the town would be on top of it and a resident would be on top of it because you've notified them that they have a leak and that they're going to be financially responsible for it. I was just trying to recognize an enforceable rule that we put in our ordinances that says that what I was suggesting is adding business days and not just calendar days, because it forces a legal requirement that someone's finishing it on the weekend when maybe the town is not monitoring that compliance. So 2 business days versus 2 calendar days gives a little bit more time, but I recognize the fact the town was going to is going to be communicating with the residents, but that's only my suggestion, that it be a little more practical and enforceable by adding that term business. And I support the ordinance in general. I mean, 165,000 gallons a year and 450 gallons a day is a lot of water. I went on Ion Water today and looked at over the last 5 years, My family of 5 in our house has used less than 100,000, on average, less than 100,000, about 95,000 gallons a year. And I think we've out, and last year in 2021, we used 60,000. So town is being very generous on using the numbers that we're providing for residents, and I'm sure at some point for the commercial businesses. Thank you.
So John, I have a suggestion. I don't agree with the idea about doing business days because we never know when a leak's going to happen and there does need to be response. But could we modify the language to say something like property owner must communicate with the town within 48 hours? Maybe he doesn't have to have it fixed within 48 hours, but has to at least acknowledge the communication with the town and work on an acceptable solution, something to that effect. There may be a burden with completing the repair in some cases, but at least there needs to be acknowledgement because frankly, everyone can be contacted within 48 hours of, if you want to be contacted, you can get contacted within 48 hours. You may not be able to fix it. Is that something that you think still gets to the ultimate end result?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. Good suggestion.
Yeah, so the council can consider that modification when we move in. I don't see any other hands, so I'm going to formally open the public hearing and check with Eddie to see if we have any public comment on this item.
We have not received any comment, Mayor.
Thanks. So then I'll close the public hearing and invite council for consideration of the introduction with that language modification. I don't remember the section number, John, if you have that, and maybe you could summarize what I just said that makes sense for you about property owner must at least acknowledge and communicate solutions with the town within 48 hours, something like that. Do you have language that makes sense for you?
I can wing it, yes. Gary's got an input.
Gary likes to wing this kind of stuff.
I'd rather have Gary winged it than me.
All right, so there are 2 changes, one to subdivision F and one to subdivision G. For G, I think a slight rearrangement to say, start with within 48 hours, all leaks, breaks, or other malfunctions in a customer's or person's plumbing or distribution system shall be repaired, or an agreement shall be entered into with the town to do so.
Okay.
And then for subdivision F, I'd propose commercial or industrial customers shall use no more water per year than the amount set by resolution of the town council, which shall be published and or posted in the same manner as ordinances and distributed in a manner designed to give notice to commercial and industrial customers and available upon request. Concern there is if this is going to be an enforceable requirement, it needs to be publicized. It's in a municipal code, so it's enforceable not just with administrative fines and penalties, but in other ways too. So that second part is about due process and notice to everyone who's got to comply.
Was that what you were going to say, John?
Yes, exactly.
Thank you, Gary. Councilmember Mueller.
I am in full support of this. It's critical that we have to do this. We don't really control our own water. It is controlled by a totally different entity, the state of California Veterans Home. It's hard to know what future's going to bring. Right now, Rector is full, but without this ability to enact these types of information and code enforcements, we're never going to get there and try to, this is really a way to make it as fair and equitable to everybody. So I'm in full support of it and happy to make a motion, Mayor, when you're ready.
Please do.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve ordinance number 22-505, an ordinance of the Town Council of the Town of Yountville amending chapters 13.08, 13.20 and 13.24 of Title 13 of the Untitled Municipal Code related to water system, water conservation, and water shortage emergencies with the modification to subdivision F and G. And I will request that we waive the first reading.
I'll second.
So just to double, first of all, a motion by Councilmember Moeller, second Councilmember Knight. Gary, just to confirm, we were introducing and waiving the reading. Do we need to reintroduce because there has been language changed?
No, because the language here is, I think, clear to the four of you. And if not, we can discuss it further. But I think the changes have been read into the record, so this is all right for first reading.
Great. Okay. Good answer. That's the one I wanted to hear. Thank you. So we do have a motion and a second. Eddie, could you call the roll, please?
Yes, Mayor. Councilmember Moeller,
Yes.
Councilmember Knight,
Yes.
Councilmember John Baker. You're muted, Councilmember John Baker.
You're still muted.
I'm sorry, I just had one more question and I was hoping I could ask it before I vote.
We have a motion and a second and a vote happening, but I'll let you ask your question.
I guess the one I wanted to ask was, is it possible, could we require restaurants to only serve water when requested? There's so much water I see on tables that nobody bothers to drink.
That should be happening now, council member. That's part of our current modified stage 2. So if there's a restaurant that you're aware of that you can share with us, we'll reach out to them to ask them to stop doing that.
Okay, but it says we could just encourage them to serve to only serve water in the code.
It is part of the drought emergency language that's been made very specific already.
Okay, well then I support it.
So Eddie, can we just confirm whose votes you've received?
Yes, Mayor. We have received votes from Councilmember Moeller, Councilmember Knight, and Councilmember John Baker. You are agreeing or?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And Mayor Dunbar.
Yes. I wanted to make sure we got all 4 votes properly recorded. So yes, that passes unanimously. Thank you. We're going to move on to our first of 2 administrative regular items. Item 10A, year-end financial report. Consider adoption of resolution number 22-4097, approving the year-end financial report for fiscal year 2020, 2021, and budget adjustments assigning the available unassigned fund balance in the fiscal year 2021-2022 budget. Let's start with Celia.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. Good afternoon. So today we have a bit of a look back at the town's financial status at the end of fiscal year 2020-2021. This report reflects all applicable year-end journal entries being posted to the general ledger and is supported by the annual comprehensive financial report that was presented to the town council at the December 7th meeting. The staff report includes a lot of detailed information such as final budget to actual comparison of major town funds for fiscal year 2020-2021, as well as some additional analysis of revenues and expenditures. But what is really exciting about this report is that it gives the town council an opportunity to reallocate a substantial amount of unassigned fund balance in the general fund. So before that, we have a small review of some of the highlights of fiscal year 2021. Eddie, if you could start the PowerPoint, it's very short. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so just a reminder that during fiscal year 2020-2021, discretionary transfers, such as those contributions to the OPEB trust and the pension rate stabilization plan trust, and the internal service funds for repair and replacements, were still suspended. And this was a precaution due to the unpredictability of the COVID-19 pandemic. Property tax and sales tax revenues did exceed budget projections. Transient occupancy tax did not meet the original budget, which was $5.2 million. If you recall, at mid-year, we bumped that down to $4.2 million, but it did exceed that adjusted budget and ended around $4.8 million. And expenditures were less than originally budgeted in general fund departments. And I think one more, yes, the result of this fiscal year activity was a healthy amount of unassigned fund balance in the general fund at June 30, 2021. Next slide, please. Okay, so this shows how the general fund fund balance was allocated into the fiscal year 2021-2022 budget as approved by the town council at the time of budgeting. So when we're budgeting, it's an estimated fund balance in the general fund, and then we propose allocations based on that. And this here is showing the true fund balance as of June 30 in the general fund after completion of the audit, so that $5.8 million. So then we reduce that number by the allocations that were approved in the current year budget, and that end result is the $1,802,600 of unassigned fund balance that is now available to reallocate. Next slide, please. So a quick review of the statuses of some of our reserves. The OPEB Trust Fund is at $5.7 million as of November. PRSP Trust Fund is at $2.5 million. And then both the Emergency Reserve Fund 04 and Revenue Stabilization Reserve Fund 05 are at just over $2 million. Side note, we did get today the December statements for the OPEB Trust and the PRSP Trust, which did reflect investment earnings. So that is positive. Those balances as of December are slightly higher than you see here. Last slide, please. Okay, and if you want to just enter through all of those carrots to show all of the staff suggestions for reallocating the $1.8 million of unassigned fund balance. So this was outlined at the end of the staff report to transfer $350,000 into the Emergency Reserve Fund 04, transfer $250,000 into the Revenue Stabilization Reserve Fund, which will help reach that council goal of bolstering reserves when possible, transferring $400,000 into the Capital Projects Fund 50, a contribution of $225,000 into the OPEB Trust, also a contribution of $325,000 to the PRSP Trust, a transfer of $200,000 into the Facilities Repair and Replacement Fund 81, and lastly, we would maintain that remaining $52,600 in the general fund unassigned fund balance, or reallocate based on any other ideas that town council may have. So at this point, I don't know, Mayor, if you'd like to leave that slide up for everyone to view, or if you'd like to close that and we could have questions and discussion.
I think it's a good idea. First of all, thank you, Celia. I think it's a good idea to leave that slide up that you have, even though it is in the staff report. First question I want to ask is, do we think especially based on the housing discussion we just had and the possibility of purchasing at least one and potentially future low income, deed restricted housing units, should we try to reallocate any funding into our housing fund, or do we feel like we have sufficient funds there, especially based on Measure S, that we don't have to do that in this go around here? Thoughts, either Celia or Steve?
Yeah, I'll take this one. I also think, Mayor, Council, you'll note that we're still setting aside 2.8 million related to the potential acquisition of the Yountville Elementary School site, which most likely will not need. So at some point, we will anticipate, once we have a better final understanding of that, I think then, Mayor, would be a better time to look at what you might want to do with that. So you do have a significant amount of something, whether it's to use for housing purposes. You are also looking at over $1.3 million on Measure S, which is restricted to workforce and affordable. So we are, I think, in a healthy position going forward. And we did try to, Celia and I went through and looked at some of the prior commitments. We know that the council has expressed a strong desire to grow both the emergency reserve and the revenue stabilization fund. We see and are hopeful the Capital Projects Fund 50 is at a lower balance level, and we're optimistic that we may need some matching funds for some grants. And then obviously, since we had suspended post-employment and PRSP, the thought here was to put something back. So you're still likely going to be, I'm going to go out on a limb here, but I also think we're going to be in a very similar situation for the end of this year, that you're going to have some additional unassigned fund balance based on the strength of our revenue 6 months into the fiscal year.
Yeah, thank you. And the reminder about the Measure S balance being that substantial, that makes sense. I also am just a little cautious and certainly support the revenue stabilization reserve increase. We just don't know if we're going to continue to see the kind of TOT and sales tax revenues that we have seen since the reopening of California. And so I think continuing to be cautious makes sense there, but also getting some fund balances elevated certainly makes sense. Any questions from council? By the way, I think these all are very thoughtful, and you're really touching on a lot of things that I would have suggested. You didn't have to wait for my suggestions, though. Councilmember Knight.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to say I think they're prudent. So they're prudent recommendations. I had maybe some similar questions for Steve earlier today about. I know in the last 3 fiscal cycles we haven't had to dip into emergency reserve and revenue stabilization, but it seems wise to get above the policy minimum now as we continue on with COVID, the COVID situation. So I guess I look forward to maybe in a year we will have a lot more funds available. We can spend some more time. I talked to the town manager about hopefully being able to also pay down financial debt that we have on investments we've made on infrastructure. And so I look forward to this conversation in a year.
Yeah, and I think we have to be very careful. Just because we survived 2021 without a major wildfire in our county and our region, that we can't ignore that we could have extended interruption and potential damage at any time. And so I think it's also cautious that we continue to boost those funds, the reserves. Yeah, Councilmember Dornbecker.
Thank you. I think this is very rational. And of course, putting that money back into the emergency reserve fund and the revenue stabilization reserve fund are very important. I'm hopeful that the money that we have put aside for the purchase of the Napa Unified School District property is enough. And I just wonder if, can we reach into some other fund? If we allocate all of these, is there some other fund that we could, if we had to, that we could use to purchase that property? Because that's important for housing going forward. Thank you.
Yes, and the conversations that have been going on for a couple of years now with the town and the school district don't put us in a position to purchase the property directly. it is, and I have to be careful not to get into confidential negotiation information, but we have looked at more likely supporting a third-party purchaser of the property with development using conditions the town considers acceptable and appropriate for the community. And so I think that's to town manager's point about not necessarily needing it for purchasing the property, but we still would have significant investment in the redevelopment of the property. It just wouldn't necessarily include the purchase of the land itself.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions of council? I don't see any other hands. I'll ask Eddie, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do not, Mayor.
Thank you. Again, we are in a very enviable position, I will say. Hearing some of the stories from Cal Cities in particular about other jurisdictions, but not even having to go outside our own county to know the financial instability that exists in so many places. The fact that we can continue to put money in critical reserve funds and be prepared for larger investments in capital projects, it's a very positive financial position. So these are really good issues we have almost every year, especially coming out of a 2-year pandemic.
I'd like to make a motion.
Yes, go ahead, Councilor Dornbecker.
Yes, I would like to make a motion for resolution number 22-4097, approving the year-end financial report for fiscal year 2020 and 2021, and budget adjustment assigning the available unassigned fund balance in fiscal year 2021 to 2022 budget.
I'll second.
A motion, Councilmember Dornbecker, second, Councilmember Moeller. Eddie, roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Dornbecker,
Yes.
Councilmember Moeller,
Yes.
Councilmember Knight,
Mayor, just quickly, before my vote, I'd like to thank Director King and her staff for all the work they do on behalf of the residents, the town, and council. It's just a happy time to be able to vote, to be able to have funds available, and this report was clear, and thank you for your work, and my vote is yes.
Mayor Dunbar.
Yes. Thank you. Proceed wisely, Celia.
I'd like to also thank Kyle and Cecilia so much for this work. You work hard. Appreciate it.
Okay, we are going to move on to item 10B, reclassification. Consider adoption of resolution 22-4098, establishing a new job description of human resources manager and information technology manager with salary classification assignment at the same range as deputy public works director, reclassification of incumbent management analyst, town manager's office, to human resources and information technology manager, an at-will position. Approve entering into an employment agreement with Julie Baldia as human resources and information technology manager, and authorize use of $38,567 from adopted annual budget contingency to cover the cost increase for reclassification action for the remainder of the fiscal year. So let's start with the staff report.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. We have a fairly detailed staff report, and I'm going to try to give a good summary of how we got where we are and what we're proposing. And then I'll also be able to take any questions that you might have. The first thing is I have to go back 15 so years. When I was hired, I had a very strong HR and risk management background. And the incumbent was the administrative services supervisor. I'm going back to say this because we really didn't have a classic HR operation. We had elements that were coordinated and the responsibility of the town manager, and then we had aspects of the job that the incumbent administrative services were doing. The reason I'm saying this is flash forward 15 years, the importance, the evolution of the HR function, including also the added role of our information technology, coordinating the contract with our vendor, managing that. the increased activities, state laws, rules, and regulations, the evolution. So what I'm really trying to say now is we're at a stage where we're looking at and recognizing the human resource and support function that the position has been doing in the organization to reflect current and also current industry standards. So I have to share that just because that's how we got where we are. So furthering that discussion, as we launched into our comprehensive salary survey, became very clear in our initial outreach that we had a classification issue. The management analyst classification is the position assigned to, and it's given a working title of human resources manager. As you saw in the data in the spreadsheet, almost all of the comparable organizations have an HR or human resource manager or similar position, and they have a management analyst classification. So when you look at the fact that we have a working title and we've added some additional scope and classification working out a class pay for the position, it became very clear that we had an issue that we needed to resolve. And I've included in the personnel rules, we have language about the reclassification process. So at this point, it's led us to look at a new job description, and we're proposing the Human Resources and Information Technology Manager. We're also proposing, and I'm going to go into some detail as to why, that it be benchmarked at the similar classification and salary range as our Deputy Director of Public Works, and that we would be entering into subsequently an at-will employment agreement. I also think it's incumbent, and I talked about trying to position the organization from succession planning and going forward. And that's why I talk about the fact that at this point, we now have an effective human resource function. It's important that this be an operational element of the organization. So from a succession planning standpoint, for my position, if somebody was to follow me that does not have a strong human resource background or risk management, it's really important. The other thing is this also supports the position so that when the incumbent looks at retiring, we really have the organization set up so that it has a true human resource role and function. So it's a rather comprehensive request on our behalf, but it's recognition of a reclassification that is strongly, strongly warranted based on the data, the review, and what the incumbent is doing. But more importantly, I also think it really prepares and shows the evolution of the organization. And in my 15 years, we've evolved in a number of areas, and this just being the most recent one. So I'm happy to take any questions that you might have, but we have looked at this quite a bit. We have a detailed job description. We have the commensurate employment agreement that is consistent with that of our deputy director. And of course, I do need to use a little bit of our budgeted assigned contingency fund. We are still in a very healthy position midway into the year. With that, I'll take any questions that the council may have.
Thanks, Steve. And I'll call the incumbent Julie. But what I want to ask Steve is, in the council, to consider, I mean, basically, I can support almost everything you've presented here, other than the title. I feel like the title of manager isn't sufficient for the duties and responsibilities that go with this. I certainly can support the salary adjustment for all the work that gets done. But when I look at, and I may miss one or two of these things, Julie, but human resources, IT, risk management, budget support, finance support, filling in as interim clerk when necessary. I get the difference between having direct reports versus having 6 or 7 or 8 hats. But I would offer for consideration the council to make it a deputy director title instead of manager, because I do feel that fits. Normally, I don't want to question the town manager's organizational authority, but I'm offering that up for consideration by the council as we have this dialogue. So let me just stop there. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, Mayor, we've had a lot of conversations, and that's why I indicate I don't. If you were to, and if you wanted to insert Deputy Director, Human Resources and Information Technology, it would not. We don't have an issue with that. I mean, it's reflective. You know, typically a Deputy Director has somebody else, but in this case, I do think it reflects and conveys what you're talking about, and it certainly also is consistent with benchmarking it as we identified with the Deputy Public Works Director.
And I don't know the tangible difference between human resources or administration. You know, if it's human resources and information technology or administration and information technology, those are semantics that's where I'd rather leave it to either you and or Gary to determine if it fits the right context. But Councilmember Mueller.
I just wanted to add on to that. I totally support the resolution with the salary increase. I also very much support the change to Deputy Director instead of manager, in addition to the reasons that the mayor outlined, but also because this is an at-will employee, and no other managers are at-will employees. Plus, it's all benchmarked against Deputy Director salary. So, just wanted to add that in, give my full support, not only for the salary change, but also the title change as well.
Thank you, Councilmember Dornbecker.
I concur. I believe that Julie is just a star and quietly back there, sort of handling many different hats. And I support the Deputy Director, although, if it were Director of Human Resources and IT, I'd be okay with that too. But Deputy Director, if that's what we I did have one question, and that is, when the succession planning begins, are you going to talk to us about what that entails? Because I'm very curious about that. And so that's just, sort of an aside. But I want to give my wholehearted support to Julie for this. She does an outstanding job. And I support her this change in the title and the increase in the salary. Thank you.
Thank you. If Councilmembers Mueller and Dornbecker could put their hands down, I'll go to Councilmember Knight.
Thank you, Mayor. I support the resolution and your recommendation for change of title to Deputy Director. And I think that also, as Councilmember Mueller said, makes sense to the organization and the flow chart as a Deputy Director. And so it seems clear to me, and the report and the work that Steve did to put this together is extensive, that this change and this reclassification is commensurate with all the work that Julie has done over these years. It's smart planning for succession planning, and I believe it's an equitable decision, a smart decision for the community and the council. So thank you, and thank you, Julie, for all the work you do.
Thank you. I knew I was going to forget some of the responsibilities, Julie, and running into the council chambers to make sure the lights get turned back on, and also running in if there's ever a lost connection of the Zoom meeting. So we need to make sure those are included in the job description. Great. You have to have a very fast first step. apparently. Eddie, do we have any public comment on this item?
We have not received any public comment, Mayor.
Okay, then I'll bring it back to council for consideration of the proposal as amended. Councilmember Mueller?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion if you're ready.
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion that we approve resolution number 22-4098, approval of resolution establishing a new job description of Human Resources and Information Technology Deputy Director with salary classifications and assignment at the same range as Deputy Public Works Director, reclassification of Incumbent Management Analyst, Town Manager's Office to Human Resources and Information Technology Deputy Director, and at-will position, approve entering into an employment agreement with Julie Baldia as Human Resources and Information Technology Deputy Director, and authorize use of $38,567 from the adopted annual budget contingency to cover the cost increase for reclassification action for the remainder of the fiscal year. I think that's the longest title I've ever had to read. And update the, and include the amendments as discussed.
I'll second.
I think we should have waived the resolution reading.
Yeah, I know. Maybe.
Thank you for that. Motion by Councilmember Mueller, second Councilmember Dornbecker. Roll call vote, please, Eddie.
Yes, Councilmember Mueller.
Yes.
Councilmember Dornbecker.
Yes, with pleasure.
Councilmember Knight.
Yes, and I agree with Councilmember Mueller that maybe there should be a word limit on titles of a resolution. So,
That's just another resolution, Councilmember Knight.
that's a yes, and thank you again for the work that Julie does for the community.
Mayor Dunbar.
Yes. So thank you, Steve, for bringing this forward, and thank you, Julie, for not only on the council's behalf, but the staff's behalf and our community, all the work that you do. So much of it does go unseen by the public, but we know it. So thank you very much. It's well deserved. Okay, now let's move on to staff informational reports, monthly financial reports for November and December 2021.
All right, I'll take this one on. Good afternoon, Mayor and Town Council. Today I'm presenting our November, December financial reports, but of course focusing on our December numbers. So for our property tax revenue, we received our first major installment of property tax in December, and that brought us right up to our expected budget for halfway through the year, and we'll receive the second half later in this fiscal year. So no concerns there. Sales tax is looking healthy as well. The reported numbers in this report shows collections applicable only to the first 4 months of the fiscal year, and that brought us up to 40%. So we're a little bit ahead of schedule there for sales tax, looking good. And TOT revenue is also looking very healthy, as we all know. And just like sales tax, the reported number on this report is also only for the first 4 months for TOT revenue. So with the first 4 months, we're reporting 77% of our TOT revenue budget. So obviously we'll have no problem hitting our budget amount soon for TOT revenue. Revenue is looking very good. Moving on to expenditures, most of our general fund expenditures are within the 50% target for December. And the only standout exception is our community promotions budget, but that is expected to level out. And the reason it's high, I think it's about a 75% or so, is because we recently paid this department's largest expense in full. So that'll even out. And besides that, there's really not much to report regarding expenditures. The finance team, we are performing a mid-year budget analysis right now, and we'll continue to keep an eye on all of our expense accounts to avoid going over budget wherever possible. Moving on to capital projects, no capital projects are over budget at this time. And for the water and wastewater funds, they're also trending fairly close to the 50% target. And there isn't, once again, too much to note for the enterprise funds. In January, we will complete the transfers from wastewater operating fund into the wastewater joint treatment capital fund 63, as well as the wastewater capital fund 64. That is it, but mid-year, everything is looking pretty good. Any questions?
Kyle, thank you. Any questions from council? I would like to believe that those trends are going to continue indefinitely. Fingers crossed.
Would be nice.
Celia's like, I don't know, maybe, maybe not. Okay, well, thank you for that report. Next up is, I believe, Celia, you're going to talk State Water Resources Control Board.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you, Mayor. So just a quick summary of this little staff report. So back in September, the Finance Department participated in a survey that was launched by the State Water Resources Control Board regarding the number of water and wastewater accounts that were unpaid due to the economic impacts of COVID-19 and the dollar amount related to water charges that were outstanding. The reason for the survey was to assist the control board, I'll just abbreviate there, in allocating federal funding from the California Water and Wastewater Arrearage Payment Program in the amount of $985 million to community water systems. This financial assistance would relieve town utility customers of unpaid water-related charges. So the result of these efforts were that the town received an allocation of $9,517, and this helped 14 customers reduce their past due utility bill amounts. This is not only positive for the customers, but also for the water utility fund that needs this revenue to pay for the cost of purchasing water, which we all know continues to go up. There is a link in the staff report that provides more information about the California Water and Wastewater Arrearages Payment Program. So I encourage anyone interested to go visit that link and find out more. And if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Celia. Any questions of the council? I don't see any hands, so thank you very much. Next is our water conservation update for December. John?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to share my screen really quick. I assume you can see that. So moving right along, this is the monthly staff report that you are becoming familiar with. And as our situation continues to evolve, it evolves in a good direction. We were in the red zone all of my prior slides, and now we're actually in what I'll call the orange zone. That's downgrading us from extreme to severe. However, Merriam-Webster defines severe as very bad or serious. So even though our conditions are improving, I just have to remind everybody we're still in a dire, severe situation. But with that said, we're not alone. The drought is statewide. So effective January of 2022, the state issued new drought consistent and a little bit more restrictive than our own local ordinances. Some of them are washing impervious areas, street cleaning, and construction site prep are new. Irrigating of turf on public medians is something that we've been enforcing, and it continues to be something that we will continue to enforce. But the turf on public medians is what we refer to as our landscape strips and our flip your strip program opportunity. So our enforcement, the goal or the statement here is our enforcement continues, and it's consistent with the greater wide enforcement from the state issued as recently as January 6th. So with good news, for December 2021 as compared to December 2020, our reduction is 44.5%. So last year at this time, we used 36.8 acre feet. This year, we're down to 20.4 acre feet of water overall. So that's great news. We're definitely trending in the right direction. How that fares in our Rector Water Use category, you'll remember we have this seasonal average target. We are underneath our target right now, so we're catching up from our bad behavior early on in the season. We only our target was 225 acre feet. We're at 213. So these two numbers on the bottom of the screen are starting to align much closer than they were. 53.3% of our water used at 50% of the time. And our efforts continue. It's education, management, and enforcement. We'll apply the new ordinance when it goes into effect that will help us make this happen. And this is a reminder, our enrollment actually dropped by a couple of people in between this month and last month. So we do want people to continue to enroll for Eye on Water. And just a reminder that the weather, the near-term forecast shows no rain. So be ever mindful of your water use. And with that, I'm available with questions.
Thank you, John. Any questions from council? Certainly trending in a good direction. And hopefully we have a couple more months of, winter rains. That would be nice.
Even after December, when so many family members were in town, I was really nervous about the water, but yay.
Okay, thank you, John. Okay, next up is item 12, council meeting reports. I do not have a flood control report. The only thing I wanted to report related, not really to Cal Cities, but close enough. A reminder at the state level that Governor Newsom announced a $213 billion budget proposal for this next fiscal year, including a little over $45 billion in surplus from strong tax returns, similar to what happened last year. So there are priorities that he is already identifying: COVID, emergency COVID funding, homelessness, wildfire response and mitigation, drought relief, and healthcare coverage expansion. There'll be a revise, as is every year, by mid-May. So we'll keep our eyes on that. And I've heard already from our state legislators that they're looking at various funding opportunities in their districts. So we'll continue to monitor that going forward. Also, just a reminder about the Omicron variant and public health. Countyofnapa.org has a lot of information on the website, countyofnapa.org, about testing and vaccination clinics in their locations, but also what you should do if you are exposed to somebody who tests positive, or if you in fact test positive. And they're doing their best to keep up with all state and federal COVID guidelines. And so you can go there if you need very specific information. It's a good stop there. One of the things that was confusing to folks was the change in the number of days for isolation down to 5 days after a positive test. So check that website to stay updated on a lot of that information. Also, I participated late last week in a video shoot with Visit Napa Valley regarding the impacts from the pandemic on travel to Napa Valley, and that is going to be released tomorrow. It's either tomorrow or Thursday. I can't remember exactly, but look for that. So that's all I have. Are there any other meetings to be reported? Councilmember Knight.
Thank you, Mayor. Just briefly, last week I attended the Cal Cities Policy Committee orientation. It was a good couple hours. We also got a report of the governor's budget, and all policy committee meetings this year will be by virtual Zoom, and I'll be serving on the Community Services Committee. And then I'll also tomorrow, as the town's current alternate to NVTA, attend that meeting.
Yes, thank you. And I'll ask you to report out on February 1st if there's any significant information from that meeting. Thank you. Councilmember Mueller.
Just also wanted to report that I also attended the first meeting of 2022 for Cal Cities Environmental Quality, and solid waste, once again, is the #1 topic that the majority of people wanted to talk about. So, and just to mention, we're beginning in Upper Valley Waste Management to start reviewing some of what you're gonna be hearing a lot more about later. Maybe we'll have a presentation from Christy Pistoni. They are called OOPS tickets. So as part of our education, we've all been talking about, now we've implemented putting our organics and food scraps into our green bin. So there will be periodic surveys of just flipping the lid and seeing if everything's in the right spot, and you'll be getting an OOPS ticket. So it's part of our education process, and we'll give you some more details on that later.
Yes, and at least we have a temporary reprieve from any fines for having improper waste in the recycle stream. Okay, any other final reports? Councilmember Dornbecker.
Just, I also attended the orientation for the League Policy Committee members, and I will again be serving on revenue and taxation. And that's going to be very interesting. They're going to look at restoring tax credit exemptions. And this year, because there's $6 billion that is restored to fund that. So there are a few things, but it was mostly orientation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. So I believe that's going to take care of our business for today. We do have, Steve, if we can just add this to the meeting, can you remind the public the process that is currently underway for application and the process for appointment to the vacancy on the council?
Happy to do so, Mayor. You saw earlier, actually, with the demonstration of the new housing element update on the town's website, there's also a button for town council vacancy. And if folks will click there, they'll find all the information related to the timeline and the fillable application form. The key requirements are that the application material must be submitted by 4 p.m. on Friday, January 28th. The February 1st council meeting will include an agenda item for interview, an agenda item for public comment after the conclusion of the interviews, and then action can be taken by the council regarding appointment. And if an appointment is made, the person can be sworn in and begin serving on the council. So again, the town's website has lots of information, and if anybody has questions, they can reach out to myself directly or to Town Clerk Eddie Gomez.
Thanks. And just to be clear, it's no later than that deadline. People can certainly apply prior to that deadline. Okay, I think that takes care of our business for today. So I'll go ahead and adjourn our meeting to our next regular scheduled meeting. We believe that will be the next time we're getting together, which is Tuesday, February 1st, 2022 at 3 p.m. If that changes based on applicant interviews or any other business, we'll certainly post that, but that's the plan for now. With that, thanks everyone, and meeting is adjourned.